Hello everyone. This lecture is just trying to bring together everything that we've been doing so far to help you understand perception's role in knowledge. Here's the big picture so far. Perception is really complicated. We don't think about all of the things that our brain is doing to make perception happen, but there's a great deal going on. And we're just not aware of it. We take for granted what perception does, but we don't really give credit for what's going on. But, as we've learned, these complications bring about some real problems too. Perception is deeply flawed, but it's necessary. If we just throw it out, then we're in real trouble because perception is our one window to the world. So, part of TOK is figuring out how to deal with perception and use it wisely. One thing we need to really consider is how perception relates to knowledge. And I want to think about something that Abel talked about in his chapter 2. He divided the world or philosophy really into two areas. He talked about knowledge versus experience. Knowledge comes under the category, I put it here, of K equals JTB, because of course that's the knowledge equation. But then I want you to think about possible justifications that of course will fit in the J. Alright, so if we look at the left side of the chart here, the knowledge equation has under it knowledge by description, which counts as propositional knowledge, and knowing that, which can be translated into I know that P. All of these are philosophical, and all of these depend on language, because in order to work, they have to be communicated. On the right, though, is really how we justify our relationship to the world and how we prove knowledge claims. The first step is always going to be perception, because if it's not our perception, it's going to be somebody else's perception. Even if someone communicates something to us in propositional knowledge, they have to somehow perceive of it first. So possible justifications will be experience, knowledge by acquaintance, and of course knowing how, as we talked about, that is having the skill to do something, but not necessarily knowing what's going on. All of these possible justifications, as I said, involve perception, and so we really need to think about the importance of perception. So in order to talk about the importance of perception, we have to think about what's going on during perception. Let's go back to what Abel claims. He said that perception was subjective, discontinuous, and deceptive. And I hope you liked the translation error from PowerPoint to explain everything. It dropped the S down to the second line, but I thought it kind of worked if we're talking about flaws in perception. Anyway, going back to subjective, of course our perceptions can vary greatly depending on lighting or our biological conditions or where we're positioned or whatever. Also, you might see something differently from how I see it. Perceptions are discontinuous, as we've talked about. Our brain is really taking snapshots of the world and putting those snapshots together. Chances are we're not missing anything major during those little segments where the brain is turned off, but who knows? And of course, there are lots of things that can trick us. Magicians exist for a reason because we have shown that we can be tricked. So, perception has some problems. Van der Lageman also talked about what's going on during perception. He claims that we need to think about context, figure and ground, visual grouping, and expectations. Of course, context can change the size of something that we see. Our brain is constantly making adjustments depending on where we are or where our subject is. Also, our brain can literally flip the world upside down for us, as our eyes are really reflecting images that are upside down, and the brain translates those images to make sense to us. Figure and ground, we focus on the figure, not the background, so lots of things can be missed in the background. Visual grouping, as Scott Fraser said, the brain abhors a vacuum. We like the world to make sense, so we can even look at clouds and make sense of them and make them look like pictures. But those clouds aren't necessarily forming a picture. While this is a nice skill to have, it's not always consistent or accurate. And then, of course, expectations, as both Abel and Van der Lageman have said, it's not so much that seeing is believing, it's more like believing is seeing. That's something that we have to consider. So what I hope you've learned over the last month, if nothing else, is that even when perception is working for us as it's supposed to, we have to keep in mind that all seeing, every perceptual experience we have, is really seeing as or perceiving as. We don't see anything exactly as it is. Instead, we see everything as it is to us. And so we might bring in conventions or beliefs or preconceived notions. We have certain biological limitations, or as we've evolved as a species, we've developed certain skills. But we are only capable of seeing things and interpreting things as they relate to us. This can leave a lot out. We're missing a lot of stuff. Now, Abel goes on to talk about something called a protocol. And he says, hey, everything is perceiving as except for maybe these things called protocols. If we receive any perception without any interpretation, without drawing any conclusions about it, it's called a protocol. He talks about it as blue, here, now. And what he means by that is if something goes across our visual field and we haven't really made any thoughts about it, but we maybe subconsciously notice it, that is a protocol. But the question is, does this really happen? Is there ever a moment that we perceive something and don't actually interpret it? An epistemologist named Robert Audi goes a little more into detail about this, and I like the way he explains it in what he calls perceptual hierarchy. He gives us 3 levels of the perceptual hierarchy, and I'm going to start from the bottom here. The bottom, the foundational level, is called simple perception. This is roughly the same thing as Abel's protocol. Simple perception, as you see here, is if something is in our perceptual field, but we've made no interpretations about it, then it's protocol, it's simple perception. The important thing about simple perception is that we could draw conclusions about it. It's there in front of us. It is able to be perceived, and in that way it's called a perceptible, able to be perceived. The second level of the perceptual hierarchy is a level called objectual perception. I know that's kind of a confusing word. The way I would think of it is as perceiving to be or perceiving as. This simply means that as part of our perceptual experience, we're starting to draw minor conclusions. We're starting to notice that something is maybe square-shaped or blue or white. So we are starting to become acquainted with its features. We're not yet necessarily ready to make a strong knowledge claim about it, but we do have a sense of characteristics of it. When we're ready to make a strong knowledge claim about it, it becomes propositional perception, or this is where we get to perceiving that, or knowledge by description, or I know that P. And here, we are willing to make a claim about it, and that claim can be tested and can be proven true or false. This is an important step, and this shows how perception starts from a very simple place and can go all the way up to propositional knowledge or philosophical knowledge. Okay, I hope this lecture has helped you begin to really think about how perception fits into the knowledge equation. Perception is justification. But it's not always justification because, as we've talked about, perception can have many flaws. But it's our window to the world. We have to use it. So our next step is going to be to think about, well, what can we really know? How do we know it? And how do we prove it? So we're going to start going through some really interesting, at least to me, philosophical terms and see if that helps you. Until next time.